Mr. President, since the end of December, the whole world has been watching as the United States continues to escalate tensions and fuel hysteria around Iran, declaring that help is already on the way. What's more, in its official statements, Washington has not even tried to cover up the genuine reasons for its alleged concern over the country's internal political situation as it threatens new strikes against Iran. Today's meeting, convened by our American colleagues, is nothing more than yet another attempt to justify blatant aggression and interference in the internal affairs of a sovereign state. And if, as Washington puts it, Iran's authorities do not come to their senses, then Washington will solve the Iranian problem in its favorite way, through strikes aimed at overthrowing an undesirable regime. To lend credibility to their actions and to justify them, they haven't invited today's briefers, individuals who have been living in the United States for some 20 years and promoting an anti-Iranian agenda in Washington's interests. These so-called briefers cannot speak on behalf of the Iranian people. We firmly reject any attempts by the U.S. to waste Council members' valuable time on briefings that are meant only to serve the interests and the position of those who convene this meeting, and briefings that are in no way related to issues of international peace and security. What just took place overall was nothing more than a circus, an embarrassment, a cheap show that is unbefitting of members of the Council. Mr. President, we have carefully studied the letters circulated in the Security Council in recent days from the Iranian mission. We express our solidarity with the people of Iran and mourn all innocent victims. We see that hostile external forces are attempting to exploit the current situation in order to overthrow a government they find objectionable and destroy the Islamic Republic of Iran as a sovereign and independent state. At the same time, we note that the authorities in Tehran have declared and reaffirmed their commitment to their international obligations, including respect for human rights and ensuring conditions for the peaceful expression of public opinion, while at the same time fulfilling their inherent duty to protect citizens' lives, public order, and the country's territorial integrity. As far as we can tell, the protest momentum has begun to subside, and the situation is gradually normalizing. The government of Iran has taken the necessary steps to stabilize the economic situation and has established a constructive dialogue with the public in order to address any emerging issues. Mass rallies have taken place in the Islamic Republic of Iran in support of the country's supreme leader and its independent course. The Russian Federation is convinced that today's meeting of the Council should be approached through the lens of its mandate to maintain international peace and security and uphold international law, and not through the lens of Iran's internal political affairs. Violations of the aforementioned norms and principles in the current situation are obvious. They include the extremely dangerous and irresponsible rhetoric employed in recent days by U.S. leadership, which has gone as far as openly calling for the takeover of state institutions in Iran and threats to assist the protesters. Such statements amount to nothing other than incitement to violently overthrow the constitutional order of a sovereign state. They are a gross violation of paragraphs 4 and 7 of Article 2 of the UN Charter, which prohibit the threat or use of force and establish the principle of non-interference in the domestic affairs of states. Mr. President, what is happening on the streets of Iran in recent days has gone far beyond peaceful protest. There have been documented cases of firearms use, killings of law enforcement officers as well as civilians, arson attacks on medical facilities and public institutions, as well as attacks on emergency service facilities. These actions cannot be covered up by the pretext of freedom of expression or protecting human rights. What is happening in Iran is yet another example of the use of tried and tested methods for a color revolution in which specially trained armed provocateurs transform peaceful protests into senseless violence, riots, destruction of public property, brutal killings of police officers, state security personnel, and peaceful protesters, including children. As we have already seen repeatedly in a number of states, all these actions are either directed or supported by external forces that are interested in a so-called regime change. In the present situation, these external forces are not even bothering to conceal their involvement in violent actions, especially given that the President of the United States has openly called on protesters to take over Iranian state institutions. The U.S. and its cheerleaders are actively exploiting the economic and social difficulties faced by ordinary Iranians, difficulties caused by unlawful sanctions pressure imposed on Iran by Western states. They are using this to inflame public tensions and destabilize the domestic political situation. The current situation is clearly in line with Washington's declared policy, once supported by its allies, of maximum pressure on Tehran in order to advance their own political interests in the Middle East. They are using every means available to achieve this. This includes not only unlawful unilateral sanctions imposed in circumvention of the Security Council and in blatant violation of the UN Charter, but also unceremonious blackmail of other states by increases in trade tariffs. Our Western colleagues are not above using the Security Council as a tool to promote their delusional agenda. A striking example of this is the attempt by the UK, France, and Germany to create the illusion of reinstating anti-Iranian Security Council resolutions through the purported triggering of the snapback mechanism envisioned in Resolution 2231 of the Security Council. Their justification for this relied on Western states' fabrications about some sort of threat to international peace and security posed by Iran's peaceful nuclear program. And this is despite the fact that the IAEA Director General has never reached such conclusions in his reports on the matter, nor found evidence of diversion of nuclear material to military purposes. And the entire crisis surrounding the implementation of the JCPOA was provoked by Washington's unilateral withdrawal from the nuclear deal in 2018. Nevertheless, the EU3 continues to promote its baseless narrative and deepen divisions within the Security Council. What is most concerning is Washington's aggressive course towards the use of military force and threats of its use against Iran. We condemn such actions, no matter what arguments are used to justify them, as a gross violation of international law and the UN Charter. We strongly urge the hotheads in Washington and other capitals who seem to be contemplating a repeat military venture to come to their senses and avoid a repetition of the tragedy of June 2025, when U.S.-Israeli aggression nearly resulted in a major nuclear catastrophe with inevitable humanitarian and environmental consequences. We demand that the United States and its like-minded partners refrain from further reckless steps, including those involving nuclear facilities. They should rather focus on providing solid assurances against further confrontation and resume joint efforts to find potential solutions. This includes addressing unfounded concerns regarding Iran's peaceful nuclear program. All of this should be done on the basis of international law and seeking a balance of all stakeholders' interests. Our country stands ready to assist this in every possible way. Mr. President, the Russian Federation decisively condemns all forms of external interference, incitement to violence, and threats of use of force against the friendly nation of Iran. We call on the conveners of today's meeting to stop making themselves out to be a global judge and put an end to their escalatory actions. Your actions risk plunging the region into even bloodier chaos, chaos that could easily spill beyond its borders. And a separate appeal to our colleagues on the Council and all UN member states, we call on them to prevent a new large-scale escalation and ensure that the Security Council is not used to justify unlawful regime change scenarios or to name and shame the legitimate authorities of a sovereign state. Thank you.
President, I thank ASG Poby for her briefing and welcome the participation of the representative of Iran at today's meeting. China and Russia have made their position clear to all Council members regarding the United States invitation of the relevant briefers. Recent developments in Iran have drawn widespread attention. China has taken note of the description thereof provided by the Iranian Foreign Minister in his letter to the UN Secretary General. For some time now, the United States has continued to make statements on the situation in Iran and has openly issued threats of the use of force against Iran. As a result, clouds of war are gathering over the Middle East and the tensions in the region continue to escalate. China has always advocated adherence to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and international law. We oppose the use or threat of force in international relations, oppose imposing one's will upon other countries, and oppose any regression of the world to the law of the jungle. Sovereign equality and non-interference in internal affairs are basic principles of international law and the most fundamental norms governing modern international relations. Iran is an independent sovereign state. Iran's affairs should be decided independently by the Iranian people. China supports safeguarding Iran's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity, and calls on the international community to support the Iranian government and people in overcoming current difficulties and in maintaining national security and social stability. The use of force can never solve problems. It will only make them more complex and intractable. Any military adventurism would only push the region toward an unpredictable abyss. We urge the United States to abide by the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, abandon its fixation on the use of force, and call on all parties to exercise restraint and work together to play their due role in maintaining international peace and security. At present, the Middle East remains the most fragile region in the global security landscape, with the risks of turmoil and conflict persistently high. The people of the region have a strong desire for peace and development. China has noted the grave concerns expressed by the vast majority of regional countries regarding military confrontation, as well as their sincere expectation for resolving disputes peacefully through dialogue. China hopes that the United States and other relevant parties will take seriously the voices of the international community and regional countries and do more for peace and stability in the Middle East, rather than the opposite. All countries should play a constructive role in promoting peace and ending conflicts, avoid exacerbating tensions, and refrain from adding fuel to the fire. President, peace and development are the shared aspirations of all peoples. History has repeatedly proven that an obsession with force, relentless pressure, and wanton interference only generate more conflict and hatred. No country has the power to dictate the future of another, and no action that defies international law can be tolerated. We call on the international community to stand on the right side of history and on the side of fairness and justice, and work tirelessly for peace and stability in the Middle East and peace and tranquility in the world. Thank you, President.
Thank you, Mr. President, for chairing today's important meeting, and thank you to our briefers, both of whom have been personally targeted for assassination, both of whom have been tortured at the hands of this brutal regime. Thank you for your courage, thank you for your strength, and for coming today to speak on behalf of the Iranian people. Colleagues, let me be clear. The level of violence, the level of repression that the Iranian regime has unleashed on its own citizens, its own people, has repercussions for international peace and security. You're going to hear today that it doesn't, that it's an internal matter. Absolutely wrong and false. This demands this Council's attention. The people of Iran are demanding their freedom like never before in the Islamic Republic's brutal history. Unarmed, peaceful people who love their country are taking to the streets in pursuit of their legitimate aspirations for a better future. Well, this is our message. President Donald J. Trump and the United States of America stands by the brave people of Iran, period. And regardless of its excuses, and you will hear many today from the Iranian regime and from its friends, the regime is solely responsible for the economic misery of the Iranian people and the repression of their freedom, and they will be held accountable. The estimates of the numbers of protesters killed by the regime so far range from the thousands to the tens of thousands. Although visibility into the totality of the violence has been obscured deliberately by the regime's nationwide internet blackout. Why has the internet been shut down for weeks? Why have the phone lines been cut? Why are commercial satellite communications being jammed in a very sophisticated manner? We've had a complete blackout. No internet, no phones, nothing. Only thanks to the Starlink system do we even have some window, a limited window, into the atrocities that are ongoing. Well, President Trump has been clear. He will not, nor should the international community, tolerate innocents being slaughtered in the streets. Since 1979, for decades, the regime has posed a threat to peace and security in the name of a religious ideology. The regime calls for death to America and the annihilation of Israel. Even as its own citizens cannot afford the very basics, food, drinking water, very basic medicines, it spends billions to develop its nuclear and ballistic missile programs to threaten its neighbors in the world and its support of terrorism. Well, from its inception, the regime has been the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism, so declared year after year, bringing uncountable, death and suffering to innocents from Beirut all the way to Buenos Aires, while its rulers have become rich off of oppression and misery meted upon the Iranian people. The Iranian regime has also been a serial human rights abuser from its very first day in power. And as you heard today, young women like Mahsa Amini have been murdered for daring to uncover their hair in public. While religious minorities have been subjected to the most severe persecution, these abuses have been documented right here by this body, have been documented at length by the United Nations, have been documented by the Secretary General's own regular reports on the situation of human rights in Iran, the most recent of which was released just last year in 2025. Colleagues, in addition to the gross human rights abuses, in addition to its illegal march towards a nuclear weapon, in 1979, the regime we now know, led by Ayatollah Khomeini, gave support to radical students who attacked the United States Embassy in Tehran, took over 50 Americans hostage, and held them in captivity for over 400 days. That was followed by the bombing attack on the United States Embassy in Beirut, killing 17 Americans and scores of Lebanese civilians, followed by the supported and direction of terrorists who drove 2 trucks filled with explosives into U.S. and French barracks in Beirut, killing 241 American soldiers and 58 French military personnel, all part of a multinational force invited by the Lebanese government. It's responsible for the deaths of over 600 American service members and countless others in Iraq. Bottom line is Iran's partners and proxies with Iranian weaponry, documented by the United Nations Yemen panel of experts, have repeatedly attacked our partners in the Gulf and attempted to damage global energy infrastructure. And then finally, the Iranian regime state television amplifies calls for a, quote, one-bomb solution to wipe Israel off the map, which ironically would be not only a massacre of all Israelis, but also the Palestinian people whom the regime claims to support. In 2011, the regime attempted to assassinate the Saudi ambassador to the United States in Washington, D.C., but luckily the attempt was thwarted, and further, the regime has continued to plot assassination attempts against the President of the United States, against President Trump, and other senior U.S. government officials, in addition to those who dare speak out living here in the United States. Colleagues, Iran has destabilized the Middle East for decades. It has supported and enabled Hamas's brutality, its hostage-taking, its heinous October 7th attacks. It has funded Hezbollah. It has funded the Houthis. Iranian-aligned militia groups in Iraq, including Kataib Hezbollah, have attacked the United States and the region again and again. It's backed the brutal Assad regime, and at every turn, the regime has put terrorist proxies in other nations before the welfare of its own citizens. And as a result of the regime's actions, putting money in the pockets of terrorists, funding its nuclear and missile programs instead of the basic needs for the people of Iran, Iranians have had enough. The regime's dereliction of duty to its own citizens is what has put the Ayatollahs in the positions they are in today, with hundreds of thousands, if not millions, protesting in the streets after decades of neglect and abuse. So everyone should ask themselves, everyone sitting here today, how many people are dead? How many people are wounded, maimed, and abused in the Middle East, in Israel, in Gaza, in Syria, in Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, even Venezuela, because of the regime's support for terrorism as the largest state sponsor? And I would like to address the allegation put forward by the regime that these inspired protests are somehow a foreign plot to give a precursor to military action. Everyone in the world needs to know that the regime is weaker than ever before, and therefore is putting forward this lie because of the power of the Iranian people in the streets. They are afraid. They're afraid of their own people. Iran says it's ready for dialogue, but its actions say otherwise. This is a regime that rules through oppression, through violence, and through intimidation, and has destabilized the Middle East for decades. Well, enough is enough. We all have a responsibility to support the Iranian people and to put an end to the regime's neglect and oppression of the Iranian nation. Colleagues, let me be clear. President Trump is a man of action, not endless talk like we see at the United Nations. He has made it clear all options are on the table to stop the slaughter. And no one should know that better than the leadership of the Iranian regime. Thank you, Mr. President.